When the world speaks of legends who defined Hollywood's golden age, one name always rises above the rest: Robert Redford. The man with the sunlit smile, the piercing blue eyes, and a heart that beat for art, truth, and nature. But behind that calm, graceful charm was a deeply private soul. A man shaped by loss, love, and a lifelong quest for meaning. For decades, Redford was the face of Hollywood elegance. From Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid to The Sting, he became an icon of intelligence and integrity. Yet as the applause grew louder, his heart grew quieter. Fame never truly satisfied him. It only made him look inward, searching for something deeper, something that would outlive him. In the final years of his life, Redford withdrew from the spotlight, retreating to his mountain home in Utah, where he painted, wrote, and reflected. Friends say he spoke often about legacy, not luxury. He wanted his life to end the same way he lived it, with meaning. But when his final will was read, it stunned everyone, not for how much he left, but for what he chose to leave behind. His decision brought tears to his family's eyes and revealed a truth about the man few ever knew. This is the untold story of Robert Redford's final act, one of reflection, sacrifice, and love that transcended wealth itself. Long before the fame, the awards, and the legend of the Sundance Kid, Robert Redford was just a quiet, curious boy growing up in Santa Monica, California. Born in 1936, he came from a modest family trying to stay afloat during the Great Depression. His father, Charles Redford, worked as an accountant, strict, practical, and disciplined. His mother, Martha, was his complete opposite: warm, creative, and endlessly encouraging. She noticed something in young Robert that few others did: a vivid imagination, a deep sense of wonder about the world. While other kids were playing baseball, Robert was sketching faces, painting sunsets, and getting lost in stories. Martha nurtured that spark, always telling him, "You don't have to follow the crowd, Robbie. Follow your heart." But when Robert was still a teenager, tragedy struck. His beloved mother passed away from a rare blood disorder. Her death shattered him. For years, he avoided talking about it, but later in life, he admitted that her loss was the moment everything changed. "She believed in beauty," he once said, "so I decided to chase it for both of us." After high school, he attended the University of Colorado on a baseball scholarship. But Redford was restless. The rules, the structure, the routine, none of it spoke to his soul. He dropped out and set off on a journey across Europe, spending months wandering through France and Italy. He studied art in Paris, lived cheaply, and soaked up inspiration from street musicians and painters who turned life into art. Those years shaped his identity. They taught him simplicity, discipline, and expression, lessons that would later define his career. When he returned to America, he wasn't sure what his future held. Acting came almost by accident. A friend convinced him to try theater, and from the moment he stepped on stage, something clicked. By the early 1960s, Robert Redford had found his calling. His natural charm and quiet intensity made him stand out. His first major Broadway role in Barefoot in the Park brought him national attention. And soon, Hollywood came knocking. Films like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Sting, and The Way We Were turned him into a global superstar. With his blonde hair, calm eyes, and quiet strength, he became the embodiment of classic American heroism. Yet those who knew him best could always sense an undercurrent of sadness. Redford carried the weight of loss throughout his life. Not only his mother's death, but also the devastating loss of his first child, Scott, to sudden infant death syndrome. It was a wound he never spoke about publicly, but close friends said it changed the way he viewed everything: fame, money, even success. He realized how fragile life was and how hollow it could feel without purpose. From that point on, Redford pursued something beyond celebrity. He began painting again, exploring environmental activism and supporting social causes. He wanted his name to mean more than ticket sales. "If you're lucky enough to have a voice," he once said, "use it for something real." Still, fame brought pressure. The long hours on set, endless interviews, and constant media glare put a strain on his marriage to his college sweetheart, Lola Van Wagenen. They shared 4 children, but Hollywood rarely allowed him the quiet family life he longed for. After 27 years, their marriage ended. It was a painful chapter, but one that pushed Redford even further toward introspection. He began spending more time away from Los Angeles, escaping to his ranch in the mountains of Utah. There, surrounded by nature, he found peace and inspiration. It was there that the seeds of what would become his greatest legacy began to take root. Robert Redford was no longer chasing fame. He was searching for meaning, a reason for everything he had endured, and a way to turn his pain into purpose. By the mid-1970s, Robert Redford had conquered Hollywood. He was one of the most bankable stars on earth, charming, intelligent, and effortlessly magnetic. But despite the fame, something inside him was quietly breaking. Redford looked around the glitzy world of premieres and photo shoots and felt empty. Hollywood had given him everything, and yet taken just as much. The spotlight was bright, but it blinded him to the kind of art that first drew him in. He missed the rawness, the truth, the honesty that had defined his early years in theater. Movies were becoming mechanical, driven by money rather than meaning. And Redford, the artist, refused to play that game forever. In 1979, he bought a piece of land high in the mountains of Utah, rugged, wild, and breathtaking. To everyone else, it seemed like a quiet retreat, a place to disappear. But for Redford, it was the beginning of something extraordinary. He named it Sundance, after his most iconic role, the Sundance Kid. But this time, it wasn't about guns, fame, or adventure. It was about giving a voice to the unheard. Redford envisioned a space where young, independent filmmakers could tell their stories without the interference of Hollywood executives. A place for raw talent, for stories that mattered. He poured his own money into it, millions of dollars without fanfare, without headlines. Those close to him say he never treated Sundance like an investment. It was a mission. He often said, "If you believe in something, you don't wait for permission to make it real." At first, no one believed it would work. Hollywood scoffed at the idea. Who would watch films with no big stars or flashy budgets? But Robert Redford saw what others couldn't, the hunger for authenticity. He surrounded himself with passionate creators, dreamers who wanted to break the mold. And slowly, Sundance began to take shape. In 1981, the Sundance Institute was founded, offering workshops and grants for up-and-coming filmmakers. By 1985, the Sundance Film Festival became a yearly tradition, drawing artists from around the world. What started as a quiet mountain experiment became a cultural revolution. Independent films like Reservoir Dogs, Little Miss Sunshine, Whiplash, and Get Out would later trace their roots to Sundance, the place where stories found a heartbeat. As Sundance grew, so did Redford's reputation, not just as an actor, but as a visionary. Yet he never sought praise. He rarely attended the festival's glitzy parties, often staying behind the scenes, walking the snowy grounds in his trademark denim jacket and scarf. Locals would see him helping volunteers, shaking hands with students, quietly encouraging filmmakers who were doubting themselves. He wasn't just the founder, one director once said. He was the soul of the place. But even as Sundance thrived, Redford's personal life remained shadowed by loss and distance. He lost another child, his daughter Shauna, in a tragic illness, a heartbreak that deepened his quiet nature. Each tragedy seemed to make him retreat further into nature, where he found solace in silence and reflection. In interviews, he spoke less about movies and more about legacy. "Fame is a wave," he once said. "It comes, it crashes, and it fades. But purpose, that's what stays." Sundance became his answer to everything life had taken from him, a gift to the world, a platform for others to rise. And while the world praised him as a legend, Robert Redford never let that praise define him. He often reminded young filmmakers, it's not about how loud your story is. It's about how true it feels. Through Sundance, he redefined what success could mean in Hollywood, not measured by fame or fortune, but by the courage to tell the truth. By the time the 2000s arrived, Redford was no longer just a movie star. He had become a mentor, a teacher, and a quiet guardian of independent cinema. Yet behind that calm, dignified exterior, there was something deeper happening, a man preparing for his final act, one that would shock even those closest to him. As the years rolled on, Robert Redford's silver hair and calm voice became symbols of a life well lived, but also a man who had learned to make peace with time. By his late 70s, the Hollywood icon who once defined youth and rebellion had transformed into a philosopher of life, quietly stepping away from the noise he once commanded. In 2018, Redford announced what many had feared. He was retiring from acting. After 6 decades of storytelling, he said he wanted to move into the shadows. But those who knew him best understood it wasn't about fading away. It was about returning home. Home. For Robert Redford wasn't a mansion or a studio. It was the stillness of the Utah mountains. It was the whisper of wind through pine trees, the sound of boots crunching on snow, the sight of sunlight slipping through clouds. Those quiet moments reminded him of what really mattered and what was left undone. Despite his many achievements, Redford's life had been marked by tragedy. He had lost his son Scott as an infant, his daughter Amy after a long battle with illness, and endured the pain of broken relationships. Friends often said that Redford carried grief like a shadow, always behind him, never gone. In his later years, he became deeply reflective. He often spoke of time as both a thief and a teacher. The hardest part about living long, he once told a friend, is watching everyone you love become memories. Still, he remained a man of purpose. He spent countless hours with his grandchildren, teaching them how to paint, how to fish, and how to respect the earth. He wanted them to understand that life's true wealth was not in fame or fortune, but in connection. For Redford, every sunrise over the Utah peaks was a reminder of his mother's spirit, the woman who first told him to follow his heart. And in those final years, he did just that. He painted again, spending long nights in his studio, creating vivid landscapes full of emotion. To him, each brushstroke was a conversation, with the past, with loss, with love. He also began organizing his estate quietly, not as a man preparing to die, but as someone preparing to leave behind meaning. His friends say he refused to talk about inheritance in terms of money. For him, the true inheritance was legacy, the lessons, the art, the places he built. Still, there was one secret that no one expected, a final act of generosity that would bring his family to tears. Redford had spent decades investing not just in films, but in the environment. Through silent donations and unpublicized gifts, he had acquired land across the U.S., preserving forests, rivers, and wildlife habitats. Unbeknownst to many, he had arranged for nearly his entire estate, valued at hundreds of millions, to be placed into environmental trusts and humanitarian projects under the Sundance Institute. It wasn't an act of ego. It was an act of love for his children, his grandchildren, and the planet he so deeply cherished. When his family discovered the full scope of what he had done, they were overwhelmed. They had expected a traditional inheritance. Instead, they found something far greater, a lasting gift to humanity. His daughter reportedly said through tears, "He gave everything away to protect what he loved most, the earth." Even as his health declined, Redford remained composed and grateful. He often said, "Everything I've built will outlive me, and that's how I'll stay alive." In his final public appearances, he looked peaceful, not like a man saying goodbye, but one who had already made peace with eternity. He spoke about forgiveness, about family, about the courage to let go. "You don't own your legacy," he said softly. "You just care for it until it belongs to the world." And as he spent his final seasons surrounded by family at his mountain home, the man who once ruled Hollywood sat quietly watching the sunset, not as a star, not as a legend, but as Robert Redford, a dreamer who found meaning in simplicity and left behind a legacy that would never fade. When Robert Redford's family gathered for the final reading of his will, they already knew he had lived his life differently, quietly, purposefully, and on his own terms. But nothing could prepare them for what they were about to hear. For decades, Redford had spoken little about money. He lived comfortably, yes, but not lavishly. There were no fleets of cars, no gold gates, no extravagant vacations. To him, material wealth was temporary. What lasted was what you gave away, not what you kept. So when his lawyer began reading through the documents, silence filled the room. His estate, valued at more than $200 million, was not divided the way anyone expected. His children and grandchildren were left personal gifts, treasured paintings, handwritten letters, old journals, even the easel he used to paint during sleepless nights. But the vast majority of his fortune was directed somewhere else. Robert Redford had transferred nearly all of his assets, land, royalties, investments, into a series of trusts dedicated to environmental preservation, art education, and Native American community programs. Each foundation bore the same inscription: "For those who dream quietly and love deeply, keep the world alive." When the family realized what he had done, tears filled the room. They weren't tears of disappointment, but of awe. They had always known him as a man of conviction, but seeing the scale of his selflessness was overwhelming. Redford's decision wasn't about denying his family wealth. It was about giving them something that money could never buy: a sense of purpose. In his final letter to them, which was read aloud that day, he wrote, "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone from this world, but not from your hearts. I've given most of what I have to the land, to the stories yet untold, and to the young who still believe they can make a difference. You already have everything you need: my love, your memories, and your own dreams. Don't waste a minute chasing more. Use your time to protect what truly matters, each other and this earth." His words broke everyone's composure. His daughter wept openly. His grandchildren hugged one another, realizing that their grandfather's final act wasn't just generous, it was poetic. The trust he created in his name now funds renewable energy research, youth arts programs, and film scholarships for underprivileged students across the United States. The Sundance Foundation, now expanded through his estate, supports independent artists from every corner of the world, keeping Redford's mission alive long after his passing. The land he owned in Utah, nearly 5,000 acres of untouched wilderness, was permanently protected under his will. It could never be developed, never be sold. He wanted it to stay wild forever, a living symbol of his beliefs. His family visits those mountains every year. They walk the trails he once walked, see the same sunrise he painted so many times, and feel the same peace he found there. It's said that when the wind passes through the valley, it carries the faint sound of his voice: calm, steady, eternal. Reporters and fans around the world were astonished when the details became public. Headlines read, "Robert Redford's final act of love, the legend who gave his fortune to the earth." But to those who truly knew him, it wasn't surprising. It was exactly what he would have done. Even in death, Redford remained the same man he had always been: quiet, principled, and deeply human. His story became a reminder that legacy isn't measured by what you own, but by what you leave behind in others. Years later, one of his grandchildren, now an artist herself, was asked what she remembered most about him. She smiled through tears and said, "He didn't just leave us money. He left us direction. He showed us how to live and how to give." And so, Robert Redford's story ends not with fame or fortune, but with a gift that still echoes through the generations. A love so profound, it turned grief into gratitude and wealth into wonder. He didn't just leave behind a fortune. He left behind a legacy that made his family cry, not from sadness, but from pride.